Hello everyone, welcome to this first lecture of the course Advanced Micro and Nano Systems, which is being offered as a selected topics in Integrated Electronics and Circuits 1 ELL 832. In the previous introductory live session, we discussed about the brief overview about the course contents and the different evaluation policies. From this lecture onwards, we will start discussing about the different technical aspects of the content in more detail. We will go deep into the subject. So as a starting point, let me just give you a introduction to this area of micro nano systems or MEMS or NAMES, whatever you call it. So when we call it MEMS or NAMES, this is basically the acronym for micro electromechanical systems or nano electromechanical systems. So to give the introduction, we will take a historical perspective of this particular research area or research field, and we will see how this particular area actually emerged over the time, how it came first time into picture, what were the motivation behind the growth of this area, and in doing so we will see some of the use cases as well. So what do we mean by use cases? So earlier times when it first emerged, what were the application areas that people were interested in, those who were working in this particular area. Then as the time progressed, what new application area actually came up, and now in the current scenario, what are the different application perspective of the micro and nano systems research domain, and what will be the some of the futuristic research prospect as well. So as I mentioned in my previous lecture also, that this micro nano systems or MEMS or NIMS, whatever you call it, this is actually a sub branch of microelectronics or nanoelectronics. So the microsystem area actually evolved from the actual microelectronics revolution. And when this microelectronics revolution happened, we all know it happened somewhere around 1947 when three American scientists or researchers working at AT&T Bell's lab. Who were they? They were John Bardeen, William Shockley, and Walter Brattain. They discovered the first transistor. So that was kind of uh, a new age of modern electronics, because that period actually revolutionized the entire electronics domain, entire application perspective that we have today. And after that initial invention of transistor, the transistor technology itself, or you can call it IC technology, integrated circuit technology, that has actually shown a tremendous growth over the time. So in this picture, what you can see is actually in 1950s, so slightly after the first point contact transistor was invented, the first silicon transistor looks something like this, which came in somewhere in 1950s. And after that, as the time progressed, the transistor miniaturization, getting high performance from the transistors with this miniaturization, all these areas worked very well. So there were a number of scientists from all around the world started working on it, and the area showed growth as well. And actually, the co-founder of Intel Corporation, Gordon Moore, actually predicted something which is known as Moore's law. I think most of you, or almost all of you, know about it, which is called the Moore's law. It says that the transistor density on an integrated circuit doubles in every 2 years, and that uh, law, so some people had initially some doubt about it, how this is gonna work, but scientists and researchers and engineers working in this area made sure that it continue over a period of time, and it actually worked very well over decades. So if you see this evaluation or evolution uh, time map, what you can see that in 1950s where we had one transistor like this, as the time progressed in 1970s maybe when this Intel 4000 series microprocessors came into place, that contains over 2000 transistors in a single IC chip. Similarly, as the time progressed on in 1990s when this Pentium series processors came, that contains over maybe 20 million transistors per IC chips, and nowadays your latest Intel processor chips, they contains more than few billions of transistors per chip. Okay, so to understand or just to give you a visual perspective how this miniaturization drive worked over the year, this image can serve as a beautiful example. So this is the first point contact transistor in AT&T Bell's lab that was discovered in 1947, and after almost like 70 years later in 2015, this is Samsung's 14 nanometer FinFET transistor, which is one of the latest technology in transistors that is available. Now, this in this image actually no scale bar is given. Now, most of the technical images like this contain certain scale bar to give you a understanding of the dimension of the different object that is shown in the diagram. But this image is actually kind of self-scaling. What is meant by self-scaling? So from this image also you can understand kind of what is the dimension of the transistor will be. So this is actually very old. So this is the first transistor, but from this also you can understand in a way that what could be the dimension of the transistor will be. So basically this black spots that you see here are basically one single atoms. So from that you can understand what could be the size of this transistor. So it is also developed using this 14 nanometer technology, so that also gives you a understanding of how the miniaturization worked over the time. So this comparison just give you a in a layman's way that understanding of how miniaturization actually worked over the last 65 to 70 years and how much technology has progressed over the time. So you can think of it in two ways. So first is the scientist or physicist who are actually working towards realizing different physical laws or different physical concepts that can make things possible, this miniaturization possible. And then there are engineers who are developing new tools so that you can make those miniaturized devices as well. So a combination of efforts from the scientific community and engineering community, actually their combined effort plays a vital role in miniaturizing these IC components over the time. And just to give a graphical representation of this miniaturization drive once more. So this curve shows on the x-axis the time span over the years. On the left axis, it shows the MOSFET gate length. We know that the gate length is gives a understanding about the size of the transistors or MOSFETs, and on the right hand axis it shows the transistors per processor chips, that is how many transistors you have in your transistor or in your chip. So in 1970s, whereas your number of transistors per processor chips were around few thousand, in by the year 2010 or some years later, it becomes almost few billion transistors per chip. And that was made possible because earlier days, whereas your gate length was around some micron, now it's come down to almost few nanometer in length. So this CMOS technology scaling is actually a primary driver for the electronics industry. And what is the reason behind that? We know that as our transistors or our devices become smaller, they become faster, their power consumption reduces. So that's from the performance point of view. But if you say from the functionality point of view, as you can add more and more transistors or more and more devices in the same footprint area or in the same device chip volume, then you can get actually more functionalities out of that chip or out of that gadget. So you can take the example of mobile phones. Mobile phones earlier days you could make only calls, you could send SMS, you could probably click some pictures or videos. Nowadays using your mobile phone you can do all sort of stuff. But the actually the volume or the size of the mobile hasn't reduced uh, any anything like actually in some cases it has even increased in size little bit, but this improvement in the transistor holding capability in a single chip can improve the functionality for better performances. And as I said, this is not just about the gate length. Gate length is definitely one of the major drive towards miniaturization, but there are certain other parameters like gate dielectric thickness, supply voltage, device leakage. All this sort of scales down or scales with the size. And then that technology that is responsible mainly for ensuring that you have a miniaturization in your device is optical or lithography rather. We will be discussing a detail on the different process technologies on how different devices are developed in as the time go along, as we go along with the course. So lithography is one of those important fabrication process, and that actually defines the minimum feature size or the resolution of your device. So this scaling happened due to the improvement or the development in the lithography area. So as I said in my previous slide, that different scientists or researchers from the scientific or the physicist community and the engineering community, it was a combined effort of both this community to make this miniaturization possible. So the lithography improvement means the actual equipment improvement, the principal improvement in the how the lithography is done, going from optical to e-beam lithography or any nano imprint lithography or those sort of thing. So it's a as the time progress, there is improvement in the physical understanding as well as on the engineering equipment building capability also. So this again shows the combined effort how it is important. So as we talk about the process technology, the IC process technology is a bit different. So we will be not discussing about the IC fabrication technology in this course. We will be discussing about the micro nano systems process technology mainly, but they are kind of same, but there is a little difference also. So as we are taking a historical perspective into the course, so when this revolution in the transistor technology was going on, so this IC process technology was the engine behind functional integration and miniaturization of this electronics. So how this IC fabrication technology works? So it is basically the technology by which you build your transistors. And if you can think the structure of a transistor, it is kind of a planar structure. Planar structure means its lateral dimensions are quite big, whereas the different layers that you have, your gate dielectric, metal electrodes, some doped drain and source regions, those are actually very thin. Their thickness or this jet dimension is actually not so big when we compared with the width or the length of the actual transistor device. So you can consider them like a planar device. And at the very beginning of this transistor revolution in the early 1960s or 1950s, the whatever process technology the scientists had, that time, that was actually a planar IC technology that was able to do stuff in the kind of like a planar way. But in the 1960s, uh, as this process technology also started showing tremendous improvement, actually then it was possible to do this 3D processing. So you could now make sure that your third dimension, the z dimension, is also, so for example in this diagram, this third dimension is also comparable or almost at the same dimension as it's in the x and y direction, like your length or width, or even some cases the height is more than the width or the length of the device. So you can make now 3D structures, and that was becoming possible because this silicon etching technology that time was evolving, and this anisotropic silicon etching comes into play in the 1960s, later half of the 1960s, which made this high aspect ratio or HARs microstructures possible to realize. So at that time, the from the technological point of view, the technology moved from the planar IC technology to 3D microfabrication technology, and that was kind of the starting point or the first path-breaking point of view in terms of the development of this micro and nano systems. So now people could think of, okay, we now can build 3D structures. So what more we can do actually using this kind of a miniaturized process technology. And when people started thinking that, okay, we can now make some 3D structures, what else we can do? Uh, the first thing that came to their mind was to incorporate some mechanical component in your electronic devices. So the question is, why suddenly mechanical, right? Because your transistor devices are basically electronic devices or electrical components. So why then people suddenly jump to think, okay, now because we have certain capabilities, then why we should suddenly move to mechanical domain? Why not some other domain, right? Because in earlier time or even now, some of the bigger gadgets or bigger equipment that we see, that actually has some kind of a mechanical capability. So you talk about your generators, your motors, your turbines, and so on and so forth. So all of this had certain mechanical components, and if you go even earlier time, mechanical devices were the main. So that time people didn't have that understanding of the electrical world or didn't have that capability. So all the big equipment, all the big gadgets, all the big instruments that were actually available, they were kind of some kind of mechanical device. So when people got this concept of miniaturizing the devices, the first thing that came to their mind, okay, now we have this capability to do or capability to develop some miniaturized devices. Why not we now come up with some mechanical component in this small scale as well? And this resonant gate transistor was actually kind of the first implementation of that thinking. So how it works or what is the main device concept here? So it was developed in 1967 by Nathanson et al. This device is actually a one form of transistor only. What is the difference with the common transistor here? The difference is that here instead of a fixed gate electrode, you have a cantilever gate electrode, which is this blue thing. So you can think of it like a miniaturized cantilever, and it is placed like a floating electrode over your channel. And when you give certain, so on the tip of the cantilever, there is certain electrodes, and on the bottom, this where this green pad is placed, there also you have certain electrodes. So you can apply certain input signal through this pad, and when you apply certain voltage, then depending on the polarity of the voltage, the electrode connected to the tip of this cantilever actually can feel attractive force or repulsive force. So if they feel attractive force, they just move downward and the entire cantilever move downward. and then your channel or the gate electrode is actually connected to the gate material. So then the transistor operates. Otherwise, when this channel is floating, then the transistor operation is not complete. So you can think of it like a switch as well itself, mechanical switch, where you can apply certain electrical input signal and make the switch connected, make the switch on, and then your transistor will be working fine. When the input signal is off, the cantilever is floating, then no transistor operation is happening. So, because it's a mechanical structure, it is a cantilever. Depending on the resonance frequency of the cantilever, actually, you have to apply your input signal. So, your input signal frequency should be matched with the resonance frequency of this cantilever beam. Then only it can move easily and move down easily, and it will be connected to your gate material. So because of this resonant behavior also of the mechanical component, it is called the resonant gate transistor. So this device actually operates at a particular frequency and shows the resonance behavior. And you can also think of it kind of the first implementation of a micro electrostatic actuator. That's actually how actuator works. You give certain electrical force, and due to that certain mechanical action happens. Whereas if you talk about electromechanical sensors, in that case what happens? Some mechanical action happens depending on which the mechanical signal is now converted into some sort of electrical signal, and from that you can sense, okay, some action has happened in the physical world. So the sensors and actuators are basically the two main components of this MEMS community. We will be discussing more about that, but for now you can understand how the implementation of mechanical capability in your electronic chip can provide you some sort of action or some sort of performance in terms of some electronic device application. We now have an example, and this was kind of the first kind of implementation of this MEMS area in electronics chips. Okay, so it was in 1967. Then in 1970s, actually, another area comes in. So there are other areas that was growing also, but I am just going through some of the popular or commercially popular applications of the MEMS in the earlier days. So in 1970s, actually, this the entire printing community was very interested in the MEMS research. Why? Earlier days, this printer used to work using this bubble jet mechanism, but in 1979, HP or Hewlett and Packard introduced a concept of inkjet printing or inkjet nozzles, and that was actually micro machined or kind of MEMS developed using MEMS technology. So in this printer, what happens? In this printers, it uses a series of nozzles to spray drops of ink directly onto the print medium. So this is kind of a gives a cross section of this inkjet nozzles. How it looks? It has some kind of ink reservoir on the top. Then through a channel, it comes to a nozzle area, which is actually as it is going down into the length, it is becoming lesser and lesser surface area, and intermediate there are some resistors that are connected. Those are actually micro heaters. And how this work? So basically you give you pass current through your resistors, and then they become heated, and as the it get heated substantially, then what happens? So it creates certain vacuum inside your this lower reservoir, and then to fill this vacuum, your ink start coming from the top reservoir to the bottom reservoir. It accumulates in the bottom reservoir, and when sufficient amount of ink is accumulated here, because of this different fluidic force, it try to come out of this very small nozzle and get printed onto your paper or to some other printing medium, whatever is placed there. So that's how it works, right? So you heat up your resistor, because of which some vacuum is created, and to fill the vacuum, your ink comes from this top reservoir to this bottom reservoir, and because of the different fluidic forces, your ink comes down through these small nozzles and get printed onto the printing medium. And the beauty of this technology is that because it is micro machined, you can actually place a large array of such inkjet nozzles in a very small area. So if you have a very large array, basically you can print in a very high resolution, and that actually revolutionized the printing technology in the 1970s. So this technology was introduced by HP to confront the existing bubble jet technology that was not miniaturized, that was quite big actually, and that due to that revolution, you whatever printer that we had that time, that also kind of get smaller in size. So the printing technology developed quite a lot with the development of this micro machining technology. And later Epson actually replaced this heating based printing method. Instead of, they used some piezo actuator. What it does is, so if you place a piezo actuator there, instead of heating the resistor to create vacuum, what it does is simply apply some electric potential, and there's the piezo actuator deform and create some sort of pressure, due to which your inks comes and go through the nozzle, like in the previous case only. So that was also kind of micro machined or MEMS based technology. So after that, lot many development has happened in this particular area, and the printing technology has progressed quite a lot. But this was kind of the starting point for this revolution in the late 1970s. And nowadays actually the application of this area, so this is again, there is electromechanical aspect is definitely there, because um, some sort of forces, mechanical forces and all are involved in this application. But now you see that it is not about just a cantilever kind of mechanical structure, you now have some fluid involved as well. So now you see that some other component of the physical domain are arriving into your electronic chips. Basically, now you can add the fluid mechanics as well in top of solid mechanics in your electronic chip components. And later on, the application of this particular area actually extended to the printing of different organic, chemical, biological molecule, etc., which has tremendous applications in different field of biology and biochemistry and so on. As these areas were actually progressing, the area or the application which was most popular in the 1970s, 80s, or even 1990s also, or which is perhaps one of the most successful commercialized product available out of MEMS devices, is accelerometers, or later on you can add different other components to it, and you can call it IMU, or inertial measurement unit as well. So this is let me just first go through the working principle of MEMS accelerometer. Perhaps many of you already know how it works, but if you don't know about it, then let me just go through it. Basically, MEMS accelerometer, earlier days it was popular due to interest from the automotive industry. The car manufacturers were very interested in this kind of accelerometer to prevent accidents. So accelerometer means it measures the change of acceleration basically. So when your car is moving, and if suddenly some you uh, push your brake very hard, or if that situation arrives due to some accident and there is a sudden change of acceleration, Then what will happen, the accelerometer will be sensing the change in acceleration, and that sensing can save your life basically. So that time what happened, due to the sudden change, if this accelerometer is sensing the change of acceleration, and based on that sensing it can enable certain precautions or measurements that can help to you to survive. So you have perhaps seen in different movies or in some YouTube videos also that when this thing happens, then suddenly a balloon comes in front of the driver or whoever is sitting in the front seats, and that balloon actually can save you from the impact of that accident. So it was very important for this safety point of view. And why these car manufacturers were so interested, because the response time of this MEMS accelerometer was quite fast. It was very fast responding device. So it can do the entire process within a fraction of a second, and it can save your life basically. So that's why these car manufacturers were so interested in this MEMS accelerometer technology. Later on, it became popular in the cell phones also, particularly in your smartphone. Perhaps whatever smartphone you have now, you have few of them at least in your mobile phone. To understand, you can understand it very easily from the use of your smartphone as well. So if you hold your smartphone in one particular direction, if your light is on and your mobile display is on, then if you just turn down your mobile phone so that your front screen actually is now facing the other direction, then what will happen, your the mobile display light will suddenly get switched off, or the light will be turned off. So that happens because the mobile phone is sensing, okay, now you are not looking at the mobile display screen anymore, so you can now turn off the light, and it does so within in a fraction of seconds again. So what is the utility of that? Basically, if your light is turned off, your display light is turned off, then you are saving some energy. You are making your devices energy efficient. So that kind of helps in the application point of view as well. But there are other applications, a large number of other applications that is needed in your mobile phone as well. So in all of that, this accelerometer or the inertial measurement units plays a very important role. So this is the typical structure of a MEMS-based MEMS capacitive accelerometer. It consists of some moving parts. So this each kind of structure is actually a moving part which is connected to these electrodes, and there are certain fixed electrodes as well. So this moving electrode and fixed electrode, initially they have certain gaps. When there is a movement or sudden change of acceleration, it moves very fast, and this gap suddenly change very quickly. So based on that, what happens, you sense sudden change of capacitance, and the sudden change of capacitance gives rise to sudden change of output voltage. That senses that, okay, now there is a sudden change of acceleration, or whatever way you design your device, basically you can sense the change of the acceleration. So that's how it works in a real application scenario. So we will be discussing about the MEMS capacitive transducers later on. So that time maybe I will explain the physical principle behind it in more elaborate details, and what are the subsequent effects that are important to consider in this kind of design as well. But on the broader overview, this is how a MEMS accelerometer works. So not only in automotive or in smartphone, but now newer applications of these MEMS accelerometers are also coming up, which is like smart writing, virtual reality headgears, electronic game controller, even in seismic monitoring and so on. Many new applications. So whenever you are interested in monitoring in some sort of motion or some sort of movement, then you need to have few of the MEMS accelerometer. So also now this, for this human robotic interaction also, this accelerometer is becoming more and more popular, so that the human movements or human limb movements are, you can sense through certain accelerometers which are placed in different parts of your body, and your the robot can mimic those action just by sensing, okay, the human is moving in this way, so it can manipulate your itself also in that way. Okay, so this was one of the earlier days ADXL or analog devices, who is one of the main manufacturer of MEMS accelerometer. So it is one of their earlier models. So what is meant by this plus minus 2G is that the maximum acceleration that it can measure can go up to plus or minus 2G, where G is the gravitational acceleration. Okay, so we are talking about the MEMS accelerometer, but now the same kind of MEMS structure, MEMS electrostatic or MEMS capacitive transducer, you can use it for other applications also. And it was also kind of a very um, successful commercial realization of the MEMS technology, which is based on the digital micromirrors. So why I show you this application again is that because this is something you also use in your everyday applications or in real life applications. So when you are projecting something into the screen or projecting something on your using a projector for your PowerPoint presentation or something like that. So your projector contains this thing called digital light processor, and Texas Instrument is actually one of the main developer of this digital light processor thing, which this digital light processor actually contains millions of small digital micro mirror in its chip for more adaptive projection or more high resolution projection into the screen. So um, the how it works again, so this consists of a reflective mirror, and then there are few torsional supports. So you can see the cross sectional image here. So on the bottom on below there somewhere, the two electrodes are placed. Now this reflecting mirror also contains certain electrodes on bottom side of it. So in whichever electrode you give certain electric potential, based on that it gets attracted towards that electrode and it tilt towards that, and consequently it can reflect the light beam in one direction or the other, depending on in whichever direction you want to tilt your digital micro mirror device. So if you now have millions of such mirrors in your DMD or your light projector chip, then you can deflect so much in different direction, and you can actually have better resolution. You can control the resolution on the screen. So this light modulating chip actually consists of more than 100,000 micromirrors or digital micromirror components. Each mirror has an effective area of 10 by 10 microns square, and now if you have so many of or millions of digital micromirrors, then how you can address, so you need to change the potential of the particular electrodes beneath a particular micro mirror device, like right. So you need to address each of those micro mirror in some way. So normally how it is done is using a row column multiplexing technique. So that is also very interesting, but it is very energy efficient way also to control the operation of this digital micro mirrors. Now why I talk about this millions of digital micromirror device, what is their importance actually, that it shows also the reliability of this MEMS technology. So these devices are built using MEMS technology, right? But if you consider, if a single chip contains such millions of digital micromirror devices, And now if among these millions of micromirrors, one mirror just fails, then the entire chip will be not working anymore because the display will be ruined, right? So it just also shows how reliable this MEMS technology is also, because you can have millions of such devices within a tiny chip and all of them are working fine at the same time. So that also shows the reliability of the technology we are talking about. So it's not commercially successful for without any reason. There is a reason that okay, we can now have this mechanical capability, or in this case some sort of optical capability in our chip as well, but also the reliability point is there. For any kind of application, reliability is a major concern. So reliability is there in this concept, that if you have millions of such devices, we can make sure that okay, every one of them is working fine. Okay, so so now so far we talked about the different applications of this earlier days MEMS implementation. So starting with your MEMS accelerometer, which is even now so much popular. This digital micromirror, which is also becoming popular in 1980s to 90s, but then it is also nowadays used widely in this light projector applications. Then this inkjet printer head, which actually revolutionized the printing area, and so on. So all of them actually contain some sort of electrical aspect, that they are developed using this 3D microfabrication technology, and it contains some electrical component as well. But also it doesn't only contain the mechanical aspect, it definitely contains in some cases some sort of mechanics. Maybe it's a solid mechanics, or maybe it's a fluidic mechanics, maybe it's some sort of other type of mechanical component, but it also contains some other physical domain. So for example, this digital micromirror, you have this application of optics. You can manipulate the optical light ray, so it contains some sort of optics associated with it as well. Then in the inkjet printer head, you contain this thermal heating. So thermal area, or the heating area is also involved there. So that's another physical domain that is involved in the application. So it is not just about the mechanical and electrical, but also several other domains are also involved. So that's the beauty of this micro nano systems area actually. So now if we take a now comparative study between these micro nano systems and the IC technology as such, because both of them started growing almost around the same time, or maybe in 10 years or 15 years difference. So if we now just compare these two technologies, what we will see, that if we talk about the basic unit cell, IC technology has a clear-cut unit cell, that it is a transistor. So your any functionality that you talk about, it will be consisting of design of many transistors. So your electronic circuits, certain gadgets, it will contain many transistors. So it has a clear unit cell or basic element, which is a transistor. But micro nano system, because there are so many type of functionalities involved, there is no such particular unit cell you can identify there. In some mechanical design, maybe you can talk about this cantilever. Okay, my cantilever serves as the basic unit cell, but there are other physical aspects involved also, right? So you can just talk about the cantilever as alone. So we can say that there is no particular unit cell related to this micro nano system. Then from the fabrication point of view, if we talk about the front end technology, so there are always two aspects of the fabrication technology. One is called the front end technology, which is related to the basic device development, like lithography, like some deposition technique, like etching technique. And then there is back end technology, which involves the processing which are actually done after the device fabrication, like dicing, like packaging, like integration with the system level. So those are called front end, back end technology. Sorry. So, in terms of fabrication technology also, IC technology has a set CMOS technology. So that's why also you now get so many foundries like Global Foundries, TSMC in our India, SSPL is there. So you get set process rules that okay, I have to follow these process steps for realizing a 180 nanometer transistor or a CMOS. So we have a set process. But for micro nano system, these process steps also get manipulated or changed. You have to come up with new process steps for realizing new devices. So there is no stable technology available for this micro nano systems as well. Although the some of the processes or many of the processes rather that are used in this IC technology are actually you can apply to memes and names, but there are issues. So certain materials are used only for memes and names. Those are not allowed in your CMOS fabrication. So there those kind of restrictions are always there. So because of that, micro nano systems fabrication is somewhat different from the IC fabrication, and that is the reason why this IC and or CMOS and MEMS system integration, when you want to develop all of them together in a system, that part also become very interesting or very kind of important in today's perspective. So in my introductory session, I also mentioned that why this CMOS MEMS integration is so much important. So this is one of the reason, because there is certain differences between the IC technology development and the micro nano system development. So to match the two parts together or to build the two parts together, we need to some kind of a system integration approach. So if we talk about the physical dimension or the aspect ratio point of view, then IC technology obviously is a planar technology, so the aspect ratios of that you see there is very small, whereas in micro nano systems you can have very large aspect ratios. So in normally in IC technology, the maximum thickness of any layer that you will see will maybe range in few micron. In most of the advanced devices it is in the few nanometer to hundreds of nanometer level, but in MEMS and NAMES, the capability is actually on the other end. So you can make a very large thickness or very large height structure using MEMS and NAMES. So you can get up structures up to hundreds of micron thick at the wafer level thick structures in your MEMS and NAMES as well. So that's the beauty of MEMS and NAMES as well. In terms of device size, again, MEMS and NAMES can be quite large. Depending upon application, it can go up to few millimeter even. Traditionally, it is in the range of few to few hundreds of micron. Now, actually, as the scaling trend is going on in this area also, the NAMES area is also becoming very popular, and new applications are coming where it is in, even in the few nanometer in different dimensions. So we will talk in the later half of our course about these application areas. In IC, it is again from few micron to few nanometer scale in that area. Interaction space. So I already talked about this. So micro nano system is multidimensional. You have different physical domains involved, like optics, like fluidics, like thermal, even biological, chemical. All these things are involved in your micro nano system. So it basically depends on what sort of medium you want to work on. If you want to develop chemical sensors that can sense some sort of the presence of some sort of chemical, or maybe some sort of a gas sensor that can sense the presence of some gas, then you need to consider some chemistry or some chemical aspects along with your electrical components. Basically, whatever domain you are working on, depending on that domain, you need to involve that domain along with your this microfabrication or the electronic components into your device design perspective. Whereas for IC technology, it is mostly about electronic or electrical domain, and the basic disciplines that are involved also in micro nano system, it is quite multidisciplinary, whereas for IC, it is mainly the engineering aspect and the physics aspect that are involved. So, from the application point of view, as I already mentioned about few of the early days applications, from that only you can realize that it is not just about electromechanical anymore. So electromechanical is what it started in its early days. Many successful implementations of MEMS or NEMS are also involving some electromechanical component, but there are a number of other areas that are coming up. So, depending on the application or the functionality, subdivisions of this area field can be created. So, depending on, say, for example, biological applications, how you uh, use it for some biosensing or biodetection or even bio manipulation, DNA manipulation, cell manipulation, those kind of things. This biomems is one of the most popular area. There are many researchers across the world, even in India, even in IIT Delhi, many one are working in this particular area. Microfluidics also, it is somewhat related to the biomems application area, but there are a number of other applications related to microfluidics. So for example, this lab on a chip applications is very popular over last few decades. Basically, the concept there is to bring the functionality of an entire pathological lab into a single chip, where you can collect the sample, you can analyze the sample, and you can predict the or analyze the results of the analysis from within a single chip. That is what is called a lab on a chip device. Apart from that, the other areas of microfluidics is the droplet generation, droplet manipulation, doing different functionality using micro droplets. So those are that comes under microfluidics. Then RF MEMS. RF MEMS is also kind of very popular subdivision of MEMS area. So it is used for different radio frequency applications in communications and so on. Optics is very prominent subdomain of MEMS. Rather, you can call it in a MOEMS, micro opto electromechanical system. Nowadays, this nano opto electromechanical systems that are coming up. It is again a very vast area, and it involves a lot of concept of optics along with the electromechanical system point of view. Apart from that, electromechanical devices itself is very popular as inertial sensors. So what we already talked about accelerometers, but then you can have gyroscopes which can measure the rotation or as well. And together, as I already said, they can have inertial measurement units as well. Then another area of electromechanical sensing is the pressure measurement. So pressure measurement is very important, starting from different application, from automotive where you can measure the tire pressure, to biological where you can measure the blood pressure and so on. So even in different uh, harsh environment like in submarines where you can measure the different underwater pressure or in space also, these pressure sensors are very popular nowadays. So now what this trend is going on, how you can develop harsh environment applications of this pressure sensor to suit different kind of application requirements. So these are some of the application range of MEMS and NEMS. I just say that it is not just about electromechanical working. There are different domains that are also involved in it. But there are even more, as I already mentioned, that there could be chemical, there could be gas sensing, there could be even energy related applications. So those are not listed here, but there could be a number of possibilities. Nowadays, even for computing, instead of this different memory devices, uh, MEMS or names, memory or computing devices are becoming very popular also. So we will discuss about briefly about those areas at the last module of our course. But there could be a large number of applications possible from the same kind of device technology which is developed using that same 3D microfabrication techniques. Okay, now go into some of the more advanced applications or popular applications. So I already mentioned that this analog devices is one of the main fabric manufacturer of these MEMS accelerometers and IMUs. So this is taken from our latest analog device product manual, how they are having the same accelerometer for different functionalities. So different accelerometers depending on their range, like this one has a plus minus 18G to this one has a plus minus 200G and so on. So this kind of shows the different types of products they have, and on the top it shows the key specification. For example, they are low cost, they have ultra low power consuming, they have a high sensitivity, they have a low noise sensitivity, wide bandwidth, bias stability. All these are new key specifications are coming up with new accelerometer models that are coming up, and you can see all these models. So these are the models that are developed by analog devices in this particular application space. So they are required for different applications also. So some of them are required for consumer application, consumer electronics or general purpose application. Some of them may be needed for some industrial or IoT related application. Some of them are needed for structural health monitoring or this IoT, or even military or aerospace applications also. So depending on application, they have different products. So it's not just about that. Okay, the basic principle is very simple. So if we develop a device, then it can serve the same purpose for every applications. No, for different applications, you need different specifications. So if some specifications is different from the other. So depending on the requirement of the applications, the same product can have different varieties, and the research and development is still going on very strongly in this particular application area. So the smart sensor development in consumer electronics is not just restricted to this accelerometer or the motion sensing devices. It has actually gone through a long path or long uh, uh, development route. If you talk about our smartphone, so smartphone is one of the main carrier of different smart sensor nowadays. So starting with early 2000, in 2007 when this Apple introduced its iPhone, that was kind of a benchmark point for smartphones. So that introductory smart Apple iPhone had only three sensors, but few 5 years from now, or 5 years, if we go back 5 years, in 2015 only, Samsung Galaxy smartphone had more than 10 sensors in their latest smartphone. That was the most at that time. Now I am sure nowadays it has even more. So as more and more sensors are coming out, what you can do actually, you can measure more and more quantities, more and more physical or chemical quantities you can measure through your smartphone only. So that gives you more and more functionalities, and I don't need to say that your smartphone has now more functionality than it had ever, right? So now it has this color sensitivity, the proximity sensitivity, the gesture sensitivity, or it can be used to measure some of the vital sign of human beings also. Like now with this ongoing pandemic on all, this pulse oximeter is becoming very popular. So there, even through your smartphone also you can measure the oxygen saturation level in some way. So it may not be a direct measurement, but it will be through some sort of sensor that can sense some parameters, and through some and a data analysis you can come up with the that required quantity of saturation, blood saturation level or oxygen saturation level in your blood, right? So more and more sensors are coming up in consumer electronics with the uh, growth of this kind of smart phones or different other consumer electronic products. So this slide is actually taken from status of MEMS industry 2018 by UL Development. So UL Development is an organization who work on the assessment of different technologies, what are the key drivers in that particular technology at that moment, and what will be the futuristic applications coming out of that technology. So from there, this MEMS and sensor R&D prediction for the next 10 years is taken here. So earlier days in 18 or 90s, only mechanical movement, pressure, shock, etc. could be sensed by MEMS. In 1990s to 2000, that shows some improvement. So now you can have rotation sensing, visible light management or DLP, as I already talked about this micromirror. That was also accessible to MEMS technology. In 2000 to 2015, this infrared wavelength was also accessible. So infrared camera and IR sensors were also becoming very popular. From 2015 and in the next generation of MEMS devices can sense actually a wide range of waves like ultrasonic, directive sounds, ultrasonic, RF, hyperspectral, etc. So the important thing about the futuristic application is the multi-parameter sensing. So your sensor can not only sense one component, but if you have a number of sensors, maybe within a single chip, then you can actually sense multiple parameters. So that's becoming the new trend, that multi-parameter sensing has to be your within the reach of your capability. Then actually you can do more. So that actually is the new drive towards the research, that not only maybe using a same device, but using a same system you would be able to measure different components. So these are some of the futuristic overview like odors, multispectral, IMUs, environmental sensing, etc. If we can add all of these functionalities into a single chip or a single system, then my chip will be quite versatile and it will be like the fulfill the requirements of the ongoing technological demand. To that front, to the development of this multi-parameter sensing, actually a very futuristic or very kind of path-breaking idea came from UC Berkeley in early 2000 when they proposed the development of a smart dust project, which actually what it does, it is the project where they propose to develop autonomous sensing and communication within a cubic millimeter of size. So basically the idea was to have different kind of sensors within a same system along with the communication components like antenna or different transceivers or so on, or even maybe optical communication components as well within a single cubic millimeter. So a cubic millimeter device with different sensors, power supply, analog circuitry, bidirectional optical communication and programmable microprocessor all within the same system. So this is kind of an overview of that system. What it contains, it contains an analog I/O DSP control here, which is basically the um analog circuitry point of view. Then you have a solar cell for powering the devices, thin film battery, power capacitor here. So those are the powering components. Then you have from the communication point of view, have passive transmitter with corner cube restoro reflector. You also have active transmitter with beam steering, and then you have a photo detector and receiver as well. So all, if we can actually combine all of this into the same system, then we can do all sort of autonomous sensing or data processing thing within a single chip. So that was kind of the projection in the early 2000, and this is one of their prototype which is called the Golem Dust. So they actually develop different stages of the prototype. So this is one of them. This is called a Golem Dust. What it contains? It contains a solar powered mode with bidirectional communication and sensing in the sensing part, it could sense acceleration and ambient light, and it is almost 12 millimeter cube with the total volume. So this project was actually kind of successful, and it was kind of able to show the capability that okay, now you can develop this kind of systems where you can add on different functionalities. And this smart dust actually entered the Gartner Hype Cycle of Emerging Technologies in 2003. But as the time progressed, some other emerging technology took place of it, and it go away from that hype cycle. But again, in 2013, good thing about that is it again entered this hype cycle as the most speculative entrant in 2013. And why in 2013 it entered? Because around that time or from some time back, this Internet of Things technology was getting very popular. So Internet of Things we already heard of now. We have heard uh, um, we have heard in our research papers, in magazines, and so on. So it refers to a platform where internet is connected to the physical world using a number of ubiquitous sensors wirelessly. So wirelessly is very important point here, because if you are trying to connect different sensor modules wirelessly, then you need some sort of wireless communication point of view as well. So if that technology need to be getting popular, then you need the smart dust kind of capability back again. So that's one of the reason why the smart dust become a most speculative entrant in the 2013 Gartner hype cycle once again. And what is the prediction regarding Internet of Things? So you already might be knowing that the prediction is that by 2025 we aim that we can have almost 10 billions of connected devices around us. So that will be quite a number of multiple times than the human population on this earth by that time. So what is the motivation? So if we can have such a connected wave of sensors, then what extra that we can do? Extra is that if we can sense our environment, if we can sense the surrounding, then actually we can gather all the information. And if we have information, so nowadays we say one thing, that data is the new assets. So if we can have so many sensors, we can gather so much of data, so much of information. So we can gather so much of assets around us. So what we'll do with so much of data, so much of information, we will process those information. Then we can develop a decision making capability. Once we have all the data, we can make a decision making capability, and that decision making capability is actually very important, because once we have the decision making capability, we make decisions. Okay, my this maybe if you talk about environment, okay, so we can send some sort of pollution level maybe in some particular place, and say okay, here the pollution level is this much, so we need to take some precautions or measurements so that the pollution level can go down. Or if you talk about human health maybe, so if you are gathering information from your inside of your body, then also you can make a decision that okay, so my maybe uh, inside my body the blood flow is showing some kind of indication that this particle is not so much in the blood as it should be. So this is something that information can be useful for monitoring the health condition of a patient or any in general any human being, right? So maybe if you talk about the pacemaker, so the pacemaker, if it is start malfunctioning or showing some kind of a technical problem, and if you can sense okay that the pacemaker or your heart itself is not working fine, it needs some checkup, it needs some medication, then the doctor can see okay, my patient is not doing well, so he can see it from his chamber itself that okay, this patient requires attention, and he can go there and he can attend that patient. So then this decision making capabilities can help you in a lot of way. It can make the surroundings or environment or the well-being of the person as a whole more secure, more safe, more green. That is, it will be less polluted by different components that actually can create hazards, and it will be more energy efficient, so you can save lot of resource, you can save lot of energy by making this or enabling this decision making capabilities. So when we talk about this IoT devices, let's just take a look at the cross section of one of such IoT devices. It consists of some sort of sensor. So I already talked that the sensors are important to sense some information. Then it require also some sort of microcontroller unit to process those information, and at the end it requires some RF transceivers by which you can communicate with the other IoT device, or maybe through to some central hub and so on. So the sensor part we already know that it requires sensor. So the most of the sensors are developed using this MEMS technique. It may be using some fluidic mechanism, some chemical mechanism, maybe some mechanical mechanism and so on. So it will be some sort of sensor. The sensors could be developed using other techniques like solid state techniques, some magnetic material and so on. So sensor broad part of it is consisting of MEMS devices. Okay. But what about the power source? So if we talk about the power source, so all of these components require some sort of power for their operation, and batteries are nowadays are the most common solution for powering these wireless sensors, right? But first of all, if you talk about billions of IoT devices, to power them, you need billions of batteries. So that's not a very environment friendly option, because batteries are mainly electrochemical cells. So they can create a lot of polluting elements that are hazardous to our environment. So battery is not the most friendly option. Apart from that, battery get discharged over time, like just like your mobile phone battery. So you need to either replace or recharge it periodically. So that cost you some money, that cost you some manpower, and so on. And recharging or replacing batteries for billions of devices over a period of time is not also a very feasible option. So, to as an alternate of that, energy harvesting technology is becoming very popular. So among the energy harvesting, solar cell or photovoltaics is there, thermal or thermoelectric energy harvesting is there, RF energy harvesting is there, mechanical energy harvesting is there, that is vibration or mechanical movement energy harvesting is there. So among them, we already know to some extent about the solar cells. Those uh, are basically not so into the MEMS area. RF also is a development of basically RF antenna, or the way call it rectenna, rectifier plus antenna. So those are also not within the capability of MEMS devices. But apart from that, the mechanical energy harvester is very much into the capability of MEMS devices, and a very large amount of research work has been done and still going on into the development of mechanical energy harvesting device development by using MEMS technology. Recently, this micro thermoelectric energy harvester development is also showing some very good perspective, and lot of work is going on into that area. So that's also a 3D structure that requires MEMS sort of processing. So those two at least are under well within the reach of MEMS capability. So what I mentioned so much about this energy harvesting or powering the IoT kind of scenario is because when we think about MEMS, we always say that okay, MEMS means sensors and actuators. No. So now new capabilities are coming up. So powering or providing the power supply to your micro nano system can also be done using the micro nano system itself. So your MEMS can play a very important role in developing the energy solutions to your IoT devices, to your electronic system, or to the society as a whole. So we can say that micro nano system is not just about sensing, but it is also about powering also. And this is another interesting new application of MEMS and NEMS, that is on-chip cooling, which is enabled by microsystems. So why do we need on-chip cooling, or why do we need to cool down our chip? So in IoT devices, for example, what we talked that we need to gather information for many sensors. And so when we gather information, it's producing a lot of data, right? So data trafficking is actually a very big problem nowadays. So if you gather so much of information, if you generate so much of information or data everyday basis, so now also you can think of it like in due to this pandemic, I am taking online lecture instead of the physical class. So I am generating online data. So all this data is needs to be manipulated or needs to be processed at some processor, right? And so when this processing happens, it consumes a lot of energy, and some of the energy actually get wasted in the form of heat. So you can take the example of your laptop only. When the laptop process or laptop works, you can place a hand below your laptop and you can see how much it's got heated. So this is same with your single chip also, right? So when the chip works, it gets heated. So cool down that chip, you need to have some kind of a cooler. And nowadays, what people are doing is they are creating a heat sink, on the top of your IC chip, and that's normally done using a thermoelectric cooler. Now normally you can have macro size cooler on top of your chip, but that will take up space and that will be not a very volume friendly application. Rather than if you can use the micro thermoelectric cooler, then you can save space and it can work more efficiently. So this on-chip thermal management is extremely important and extremely critical for developing energy efficient uh, chips. So this micro thermoelectric cooler works on this Peltier effect. The good thing about is that it is scalable, it is quite reliable, and it is IC compatible. As I said, that it is IC compatible means it can be developed using this IC compatible fabrication processes. But itself, if you take a look at the structure of this micro thermoelectric cooler, the same device you can use as a micro thermoelectric energy harvester as well. These are basically 3D structure. So you have a P-type pillar and an N-type pillar which are connected in some way, and one surface of it acts like a heat absorber, one surface of it acts like a heat rejector, and that's why you can remove the excess heat from the chip, and you can manage the thermal prospect of your devices or your chips more efficiently. So again, this is not a sensing application, right? Or not even energy harvesting application. This is something called the thermal management of your IC chip. This is not a conventional type of thing that you can think of MEMS in some way, but this is a direct application of MEMS technology. So what I am trying to say is probably clear from here again, that the MEMS is not just about mechanical sensing or some sort of sensing or actuating, it is much more. And when you talk about advanced micro and nano system, I expect you to know all of these applications in to some details. So then the futuristic applications with the emergence of this artificial intelligence and related technology, are going to be more popular and more important in the upcoming time. So, for example, for artificial intelligence, also you need to gather information, right? So it can artificial intelligence based techniques can work on some sort of sample set of data. So how you can generate data from your real world, you have to sense. So in that way, the sensors are going to be very important in the upcoming days for proper application of this AI based application point of view. To that end also other application areas are coming up. So for example, this human machine interaction or human robot interaction are going to become very important for this IoT or industrial 4.0 kind of scenario. So to for that human to machine or human to robot interaction, how you can make the machine interact with your human body or human gesture movement. For that, you need to evolve in terms of the virtual reality or augmented reality kind of application areas. And MEMS can actually play a very vital role there. So the prospective sensors that can be used for those applications are based on user motion sensor, force sensor, tactile information sensing, and so on. So all these informations need to be sensed from the human motion, and they can be done quite easily using the MEMS sensor. Traditional sensors as well as some upcoming technology like flexible sensors, because your human body joints or human uh, finger for example, they there if you want to measure the exact movement or if you want to track the exact motion of uh, your finger, then you need a flexible kind of a device which can be placed on top of the finger and you can sense it. So for that end, the flexible sensing or flexible electronics can be combined with the MEMS sensing and they can be integrated together. So in that way, the flexible sensors or wearable sensors are becoming very popular as well. And this virtual reality or augmented reality can be very useful in the coming days for sport training simulations, medical rehabilitation, for entertainment purpose, and in many more applications. Even in AI related applications also it will become more important. But when we talk about AI, not just this human to machine interaction, but also other areas like different other sensing, even computing. So a MEMS resonator, we will see it can act as a computing element also. So if you now combine many of such MEMS resonator in a network kind of way, you can create actually a neural network out of MEMS sensors. So in that way, it can implement some of these AI-based uh, algorithms also using MEMS sensors. Okay, so that is an important upcoming application perspective of MEMS or NEMS. Um, there could be many more also. So that kind of gives you the overview of the different MEMS and NEMS system. So to conclude, I will say that this micro and nano systems, it consists of different structures and devices which is enabling the third dimension of the silicon technology. It is driven by this science aspect or engineering aspect, which consists of different physical laws. It consists of different advanced manufacturing technologies, and it contains different new materials. You always need new materials to enable different kind of functionalities. So all these aspects played the important role in enabling this third dimension of silicon technology, which is called the micro nano systems. So in one way it is quite interdisciplinary also, not from the application point of view only, from the science point of view also it is quite interdisciplinary. And the goal of this interdisciplinary technique is to benefit the society. How? By building a smarter world where you can gather so much of data from your surroundings, by making it energy efficient, by saving some energy, by producing the local energy for its operation, and by saving some resources around us as well. So we can say that the design, technology and fabrication efforts aimed at combining the electronic functions with the mechanical, optical, thermal and others, and employ miniaturization in order to achieve higher complexity in a smaller space. That's the main goal of this micro nano system. So in Europe it is called micro nano systems, in US it is called micro or nano electromechanical systems, or in Japan it is called micro nano machine. So in whatever way you want, you can call it. The nomenclature is different in different part of the world, but they all refers to the same sort of technology. The characteristics is mainly three characteristics, because it is enabling the third dimension of the silicon. So we can attribute M cube characteristic, that is miniaturization, multidisciplinary, and for meeting different mankind needs. So those are the three main characteristics of this micro nano system. So it is a very vast area. It requires knowledge from different domains, different physical domain, different chemical domains, and so on. But the benefit of this technology is immense, and the understanding of the different application point of view, how they are related to different physical laws, how they are related to different fabrication techniques, how different materials can play an important role, along with the idea how the application play an important part in designing or developing this system, can make you a very good MEMS designer or MEMS engineer. Okay, so from the next lecture onwards, so this was about mostly the introduction to the area of MEMS and NEMS or micro nano system. From next lecture onwards, we will go into the deep into the subject of MEMS and NEMS. So in the next lecture, we will start with the miniaturization aspect in more detail, and we will see why this is so important, why the miniaturization can be so beneficial while developing a particular system. Okay, so please let me know if you have any questions, and thanks all of you again for listening to this lecture. We will join you again for the next lecture. Thank you.